Each unit within the game is going to have a unit reference card and a pair of unit ID pieces associated with them. Now, both the reference card and the unit ID pieces must match in unit name and, if available, subname. For example, these adept archers are the sniping adept archers, as it says on both pieces. Now, for the ID pieces, there is the initiative ID piece, which has the initiative icon, and then there's the battle map ID piece, which has the movement type for that unit listed right on it. The initiative ID piece goes on the initiative table, while the battle map ID piece goes onto the battle map wherever the unit gets deployed. Let's go over the information contained within a unit reference card. Each unit's type will be depicted on the top left corner of that unit piece. For example, this crown represents a warlord unit type. This reference card has the triple helmets, which indicates a squad unit. Meanwhile, this larger helmet represents an elite unit. Just underneath the unit type is the unit's alignment, both their primary and sub alignment. For example, Tangus over here is a Chaos Evil unit. Not all units will have a good or evil alignment. However, all units will have either a Chaos, a Law, or a neutral alignment. The unit name is listed on top. Meanwhile, the unit's attributes are listed just below their unit name. Tangus is an armored humanoid. The adept archers are just humanoid. And the ziggurat mummy is a magical undead humanoid. On the lower section are the unit stats. Tangus has 32 health. That is his maximum health. Tangus has an initiative score of 8 and a movement of 4. The movement also indicates the type of movement. For example, this boot icon here indicates that Tangus has a land-based movement type. In the middle column, we have attacks per turn and presence. Attacks per turn represents how many attacks any unit can make whenever they use any of their attack-based abilities. Tangus gets 5 attacks. The Ziggurat Mummy can make 7 attacks using their glowing slam attack. And the Adept Archers get 3 attacks using their bow ability. Just below the attacks per turn is a unique Warlord stat known as Presence. Presence represents an aura that emanates from the Warlord up to the number of spaces listed. Tangus has a presence of 3, so his presence affects all units within 3 spaces of Tangus. The rightmost column is a unit's defensive stats. It's separated into 3 rows, where the top row is vulnerabilities. As you can see here, Tangus has no vulnerabilities, but the Ziggurat Mummy does have a vulnerability to fire damage. Vulnerabilities have this particular shape here, which is both colored red and points upwards, which means increase the incoming damage by 1 per attack. The middle row represents immunities. If a unit were to be immune to a damage type, that damage would be negated and prevented entirely. Finally, the bottom row represents a unit's resistances. Tangus is resistant to normal and fire damage. Like with vulnerability, the icon points in the direction that you're going to increase or decrease the incoming damage. Resistances point downwards, which means decrease the incoming damage by 1 per attack. For elite and squad units, their middle column is slightly different. Both elite and squad units have a deployment cost, and an upkeep cost. Note here that the Ziggurat Mummy has a deployment cost of 70 gold. Meanwhile, the Adept Archer's cost to deploy is only 14. In addition, the Ziggurat Mummy has a 5 for an upkeep cost, while the Adept Archers have a 3 for an upkeep cost. Warlords do not have an upkeep cost, and therefore are never going to pay or succumb to the effects of an upkeep. Some units will have another stat known as their maximum and starting supply, which is depicted on the lower right portion of their reference card. If the unit has, for example, the Adept Archers, 3 maximum and starting supply, whenever they get deployed onto the battle map, they start with 3 supply tokens. Put those tokens directly on the unit's portrait. Supply will be further explained later on how it's used. Some of the same information contained in a unit's reference card will also be listed on the unit's ID pieces. The information is also split so that it is relevant according to which game board the piece is placed on. For the battle map piece, it's very useful to know what the attributes are for a unit, how many spaces that unit can move, and the type of movement that they can make. The unit type is also listed on the piece, as well as the most important information, the unit name and their subname. The subname is underlined. Other differences between each of the unit types is that the outer border for Warlords will be in purple, the outer border for squad units is in gray, and the outer border for elite units is in gold, so that it's easier to identify which unit types are in play. In addition, always on the top left corner of the unit ID pieces will be their particular alignment. For example, an N is noted here, indicating that the Adept Archers are neutral. For the Ziggurat Mummy, it has an LE indicated that they are law evil for alignment, and so on. Each unit ID piece also has a bottom side, which is utilized every time a new unit gets deployed onto the battle map. This bottom side is the unit's disabled side and indicates that the unit is currently in a disabled state. A disabled unit skips its turn and skips its upkeep payment. In addition, a disabled unit cannot lose loyalty but can still gain loyalty. So long as a unit remains disabled, their unique unit abilities listed on their reference card cannot be used unless stated otherwise. Once a unit becomes enabled, their abilities are now available to utilize during the gameplay. Units will always become enabled at the end of round flip and enable event.